Les voy a presentar a los que participan, los académicos que participan por parte de la UNAM. La doctora Isolda Luna, de la Facultad de Ciencias, es experta en biogeografía histórica, sistemática, filogenética y conservación de taxones diagnósticos del bosque templado húmedo de montaña neotropical, especialmente en plantas vasculares. Imparte cursos de licenciatura en geografía y responsable de taller de plantas vasculares, en ciencias biológicas y otras temáticas relacionadas con ambiente. Tiene varias decenas de publicaciones importantes sobre su tema y actualmente dirige varias tesis de doctorado y maestría. Isolda, muchas gracias. Por otro lado, voy a presentarles a la doctora Hilda Paredes Dávila, que pertenece a la Facultad de Psicología de esta universidad desde 1994. Es docente del posgrado y forma parte del padrón de tutores del programa de maestría en psicología. Ha colaborado y dirigido proyectos de investigación sobre diversos temas, entre los que destacan los procesos de lectura, escritura y matemáticas y el proceso de formación profesional en estudiantes de psicología. Difunde los resultados en las investigaciones, eventos nacionales e internacionales, y actualmente coordina o co-coordina un proyecto de investigación en temas de psicología, educación, participación y derechos de los niños en colaboración con la Universidad de Groningen. Hilda, bedankt. Gracias. Nuestra tercera académica que nos acompaña es la doctora Margaret Skutch. Ella es investigadora y académica. Sus principales líneas de investigación son las implicaciones y política del cambio global, deforestación, degradación, comunidades forestales, impactos sociales de la bioenergía y bicombustibles en comunidades forestales y secuestro de carbono. También trabaja con la interfaz entre la ciencia y formulación de políticas públicas, tanto a nivel local como a nivel internacional. Margaret tiene una amplia experiencia en proyectos nacionales e internacionales y es investigadora del Centro de Investigaciones en Geografía Ambiental en su sede en Morelia. Margaret, thank you as well for your presence. So the dynamic of this round table is going to be that I'm going to give the floor to Margaret, the last I presented, in order to select the first discussion point, and then we all are going to comment on that point, and then afterwards I'm going to ask the rest of my colleagues to address some of these discussion points. There's going to be time as well for the audience to place a discussion point at the end, so that if you have any specific interest, then write it down and we can talk it over after the end of the round table as well. Okay? Margaret, por favor, adelante.
Okay, thank you, Alex. First of all, I want to thank you so much, Linda, for the very interesting and entertaining discussion that you gave us this morning. I think we can all recognize ourselves in some of the things you said. We all, I think probably the chances are that most of us believe we have quite strong biospheric values. If I look at the people sitting in this room, my guess is. But we all know that we drive cars and we eat meat, many of us, and we do all kinds of things that are actually against what our values say. Not all of us, some of us are vegetarian. But nevertheless, I think we all recognize this is a very human problem. It's not only those who selfishly don't want to support the environment but do bad things. And I think you make that very clear. And a lot of the points you made, I think, was somewhat surprising. And I think it's always very, very good to be confronted with those kinds of things. I had a number of points that came up, and I was thinking as you were talking. One is the idea that other scholars working in this kind of area have talked about the nudge factors, and many of the things you talked about were sort of nudges, the idea that people need a nudge in order to do the right thing. I mean, you mentioned the context, that's very interesting. And we think about, for example, the zero-tolerance policies of New York, which are very controversial, but did, at least at the beginning, seem to work because of this context type of thing. The messages which make you feel good, which encourage you to do things because you just feel that warm glow, and stressing the positives of what you've done in the past rather than the negatives. All those things, I think, need to be said and said again, because those are very important. So I would like to ask you later to comment on how your work relates to other people's work in that regard. the nudge factor. And also, if we're going to talk about Gladwell and those kinds of people, the idea of, you didn't talk very much, but about tipping points. At which point do enough people do the right thing that it becomes the norm and other people feel really, really bad if they don't do it, because we have to find ways to reach those kinds of points. And this is particularly interesting, I think, from the point of view of what you mentioned, Alex, in the beginning, about the need for collective action. Because most of what you talk about is individual, and quite rightly so, we need to understand how individuals work, but at a certain point we need to deal with collective approaches, and their tipping points become very important. That point at which it becomes untenable not to do the right thing. And we've reached that in a number of things. It's coming in a number of things. So the question is, how? So that was the second point. A third point is, perhaps you could talk a little bit about where you think the underlying values come from, because you sort of imply that, well, you don't actually say so, but that they're sort of genetically ingrained. And the question is, where do we get these original values from? Do we suck them in with our mother's milk, or where do they come from? The more important thing is it possible to change people's underlying values, and could that change come from changing behaviour and work backwards? I think that's an interesting thing to consider. And finally, in terms of what we could do here in UNAM for greening UNAM, for having a more sustainable policy. Well, I think probably if we, just as the people in this room, I would guess, have quite strongly biospheric values. That's why you're here. You were a self-selected group. But I think generally in UNAM we would find relatively high levels, certainly in our campus, and probably this campus too, where we have institutes of ecology. And I mean, one sign is that every cafeteria on our campus has a vegetarian alternative for lunch. I mean, that's a good sign of biospheric values. Not to say that we all go for those, but they are there. But one of the other things, I think, and I think we should not forget this, several people in the introduction, you, Elma, and also Alex mentioned, no, I think it was Professor Trigo mentioned, the 17 sustainable development things. You've talked mostly, you're talking mainly in the context of climate change, which is only one of all the sustainable development things. And I think particularly of things like inequality. How in UNAM are we going to deal with inequality? We can perhaps deal with the water supply. We can perhaps deal with the plastics. We can perhaps change the way our parking lots are constructed. There are things we can do. But what can we do about some of the underlying social issues? I think that's what I would like to raise in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Would you like to start first, and then afterwards our colleagues?
I might forget.
Okay.
Thank you. You raised some really nice and important points. I try to remember them. If I miss one, let me know. So first about the nudges, really true. This is very much in line with the research that I have been talking about. And the whole concept of nudges, as I perceive it as a psychologist, is a combination of biases and heuristics, so the Tversky-Kahneman tradition, and social influence strategies, the Cialdini traditions. And these are also the things that we look into a lot, and mostly the social influence principles. So there's a lot of overlap. And we also collaborate a lot with behavioral economists that work a lot with nudges, indeed. The tipping point, really important thing. And there's something interesting going on as well, like the research that I talked about on the adoption of sustainable innovations. I thought that I indicated that the signaling value is very important antecedent of innovations. And the interesting thing is, with innovations, there's only a minority that has these innovations, right? Because they're just on an electric vehicle. There's hardly any people having them. And still, if you think that adopting the innovation tells something about you, you're more likely to adopt it. And we also found that the signaling value becomes more predictive if you think that only few others have it. So there might be the early adopters might be more motivated by the fact that hardly anyone has it, because that boosts the signaling value. But then the later groups, they come on board when more and more people have it. And these tipping points are really important because mostly it also implies that the behavior becomes relatively more convenient, easy, affordable, because economy of scale. Your question on where do these values come from, really important one. And we hardly know anything about it. What I learned from the books is that they develop during childhood, and partly due to socializations in the family where you grow up. And in all value theories, they emphasize they are relatively stable later on. And that's also what I wrote down a lot in my papers. They're relatively stable, not easily changed. And then I became thinking about that more and more, and I think they can be changed, and they do change. And there is some evidence that values do change. For example, people who immigrate to another country, they might still have their own value system, but they also adopt the values that are more prominent in that country, demonstrating that they might change. But the evidence that I've seen from value change is mostly what happens autonomously, because people encounter some changes. But I did not see purposeful efforts to change values. I think it might happen if you make sure that people reflect on their values. And that is hardly ever the case. We take them for granted. So you really have to challenge people to over and again reflect upon their values. And I think the thing that you mentioned, maybe your behavior in the end might change your values. I think this might happen if you change your behavior. Like what I said about environmental self-identity, that might be strengthened if you think about your previous behavior. And I think in the end it might also change values. And I once submitted a research proposal for it. I didn't get the grant, and I will do it again, because I still think this is a really important and challenging topic, but also very challenging because it has ethical implications as well. Because if we know how to change values in the wrong hands, this might be disastrous, right?
Yes, absolutely.
On the SDGs, also very important topic, and there was a nice exercise in the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees. What they did is to evaluate how endorsing different climate goals, changes in all kinds of systems that contribute to climate change, what impacts this might have on the SDGs. And the surprising thing to me was that there were far more positive impacts than negative impacts of many of the changes that were assessed in that report, and particularly poverty, inequality. So if you have a very good climate policy, forceful climate policy, the poor might actually benefit from it rather than suffer from it. But yeah, these fairness issues play a key role, and that's basically now also one of the key issues in the debate now in the Netherlands about whether we should implement climate policy. Fairness issue are the core of the debate. Who is going to pay for this? Or who is suffering for this? Did I?
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hilda, would you like to comment?
Bueno, cuando hablamos de sustentabilidad, como lo ha mostrado la doctora Linda, es importante esta parte del comportamiento, ¿no? Entonces, desde la psicología, yo voy a estar hablando desde la psicología, siendo psicóloga. Comportamiento está implicado en el ambiente. El doctor Urbina ha hecho mucha investigación en la facultad, hay una maestría en psicología ambiental, ha hecho mucha investigación al respecto, en donde se habla de esta parte del comportamiento, cómo impacta en el ambiente, pero a su vez cómo el ambiente impacta en esta conducta de las personas y además en este bienestar humano, ¿no? Entonces, el ambiente, ya en mi siguiente presentación lo mostraré desde la parte de la educación, cómo está implicada desde los niños, en los planes y programas de estudio está involucrado. Y bueno, hemos estado viendo estas investigaciones con personas, pero creo que también tendríamos que empezar a preguntarnos qué pasa con los niños. Los niños viéndolos desde hoy, que están presentes, como estas personas de un presente, pero también de un futuro y de una responsabilidad que van a tener, ¿no? Entonces, en este momento, esta es mi participación.
Would you like to comment a little bit? I don't know if you got it, but I can resume it a little bit. It was talking about the relevance of psychology and the behavior, to understand behavior from the psychological point of view.
Yeah.
They do have a master program on environmental psychology,
Yeah.
and therefore they consider that education and formation is a key issue in order to transform the well-being of society.
Yeah.
So that's for the main lines she discussed. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I fully agree as an environmental psychologist, of course. Now, I think education is really important as well, and I think that might also play a role in the development of values, actually, at younger ages, but at the students at universities, education is also important because they bring this knowledge into society and can help change human behavior and society in the end. So I think education is a key issue, and also to understand whether and under which conditions it might be very effective. It might affect well-being, and what I didn't talk about in my talk, I focused on what motivates people to reduce climate change, but of course we actually already encountering all kinds of negative implications of climate change. So it affects our well-being. And for a long time I thought, well, I'm not studying adaptation, we're going to solve the problem, but that's no longer appropriate. We are facing these problems already. So we're now also studying what motivates people to adapt to climate change, because this is also not only a matter of governmental policies, people do need to do some things themselves as well. So we also should understand how we might motivate people to take actions to protect themselves against climate risk, and that will definitely enhance their well-being. Yeah.
Gracias. Isolda, por favor.
Bueno, pienso también hay varias cosas interesantes que no pueden ser iguales en comunidades europeas como en comunidades latinoamericanas. En Latinoamérica tenemos una gran cantidad de gente, está llena, las ciudades están muy saturadas, y no es la misma realidad que tú tienes como en Holanda, como en Ámsterdam, como en muchas partes de Francia, y que pueden tener realmente un comportamiento distinto. Por ejemplo, promover la bicicleta, promover en México, si tú decides andar en bicicleta, es seguro que vas a tener un accidente. Muchos de los biólogos de esta facultad, de esta universidad, han intentado usar la bicicleta y han tenido problemas y consecuencias desastrosas. Entonces, no es lo mismo educar a un europeo que está acostumbrado a vivir con este tipo de realidad, a un mexicano, a un latino, a un colombiano que está acostumbrado a vivir como puede, ¿sí? Que tiene que sobrevivir hasta cierto punto a ciertas condiciones, y que no le da la vida para poder incluir todo este tipo de cambios que seguramente van a promover que sus hijos vivan de una mejor manera, pero no tiene ni la educación. Y como lo decía nuestra amiga psicóloga, no se les ha dado una educación desde que son niños. Entonces, empezar a cambiar conductas cuando eres adulto es muy difícil, muy difícil. Es mejor, como ahora se puede ver en las escuelas, que se dé una educación ya en libros de texto, donde tienen la obligación los niños de tener este tipo de educación ambiental, de psicología ambiental, que me encanta el término, para que puedan en algún momento tener una vida mejor. Entonces, eso sería mi contribución de momento.
Isolda, would you like to make a summary yourself?
No, you can do it for me.
Okay, well, she was addressing, she speaks English. She was addressing the issue of contrasting cultures, and up to what extent this contrast of cultures within Europe, within Latin America, plays a role, especially because we face different circumstances around. The way we react very much depends on whether you are in a different context, and that's perhaps an issue to be discussed. And the second important thing is up to what extent you start, at what age you start promoting, educating, informing, transforming the people in order to engage them into sustainability or environmental concern. Yeah.
Got it. So you were very clear. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, nice questions. The first, indeed, it is very important to do more studies in many different parts of the world. And especially in my field, the research is focusing a lot on Europe, maybe a little bit in Northern America, but that's about it.
And it's not the same Canada? From Mexico to
No. So it's very important to also see whether the theories that we have also explain behavior and preferences in Mexico or in other parts of Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. So I'm really keen on doing this. So that's also why I was keen on visiting you, because I really would like to see whether similar processes play a role here as in our part of the world. It might be that some theories don't apply, but it might also be that the scores on the variables vary, but that the relationships are still the same. So to give an example, I have a Chinese PhD, and she conducts the studies that she does in the Netherlands and in China. And when she came to us, he was like, "Oh no, Linda, the situation in China is so different from here." Yeah. And what we find all the time is that the mean scores are very different indeed. But the pattern of the relationships is still quite similar. So the processes underlying the choices or the preferences that people have seem similar. But of course, we still need to test it. So I would really, also for the IPCC reports, it's so important that more and more of these studies are done across the world, not only in Europe. Mm-hmm. Your second point, you also mentioned it's very difficult to change behavior of adults.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. True. And it might be easier to start at a younger age. I fully agree, but I still think that also adults can change. So for example, in Europe, I think it happened in Latin America as well. We now think about smoking very differently than a few decades ago. And that was not an easy change. Many things happened at the same time, but still change was happening. And what I now, for example, see in the Netherlands, that when I'm a vegetarian, when I started being a vegetarian, I was were not so many people doing it, and in restaurants I could eat a quiche or something, or an omelette, and there was not much choice. Yes. And it changed a lot, and now more and more people, at least, are part-time vegetarians. So you see these changes happening, and I think many different things should happen at the same time, and that contextual changes are critical as well. And that's also what you mentioned in your question. And that's something that psychologists tend to overlook. They look at all kinds of motivational factors, but the context that we are in influences our choices very much as well. So, and that might also help people to change their behavior.
Yep. Nice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to give the floor to Hilda so that she can elaborate more on education, because we are already in the line here.
Bueno, hablar de ambiente está dentro de los planes y programas de estudio de educación básica, desde preescolar hasta educación media superior. Los niños en preescolar, los logros esperados que están establecidos en los fines de la educación es: practica estas acciones de cuidado del medio ambiente. Por ejemplo, lo que vimos en el video que nos presentó Linda, está la basura en el suelo, y el niño tiene de los logros es que recoja la basura y la ponga en su lugar. En educación primaria es la parte de que ya tenga estas acciones de cuidado hacia el medio ambiente, es decir, que cuide el agua, que no la desperdicie. En educación secundaria, ya que se preocupe, que tome acciones, y en educación media superior, que serían los estudiantes de bachillerato, de prepas, SHs, es la parte de que ya tome acciones al respecto, que ya tenga estas iniciativas. Dentro de la universidad, la mesa, no olvidemos que es esta mesa de cómo las universidades están actuando en esta sustentabilidad. La universidad, el rector, en su plan de desarrollo institucional, tiene una de las estrategias que la universidad está interesada, toda la comunidad educativa está interesada en esta parte del ambiente. Pero ¿qué pasa en realidad? ¿Por qué vimos el video de que están todas las personas y pasan y no lo llevan a cabo? Se tiene que empezar desde niños con esta conciencia ambiental y que ellos formen parte de este ambiente. Cuando nosotros les preguntamos a los niños qué es el ambiente, pues ellos hablan de árboles, de flores. Pueden establecer estas diferencias entre lo que pasa en la ciudad. En la ciudad hay muchos edificios, a comparación de si van a ver a sus abuelos, al campo, en donde hay muchos más árboles, etc. Empezar a crear esta conciencia ambiental desde los niños. Hay muchas experiencias educativas. Una experiencia es la de Reggio Emilia, que está al norte de Italia, en donde ahí hay un centro de recreatividad para el reciclaje. Le llaman Remida, y los niños hacen en educación primaria algo que se favorece mucho, es la parte del reciclaje, la reutilización de materiales. Y en este centro lo que se promueve es mucho la reutilización de los materiales. Como psicóloga educativa, yo tengo una sala de lectura donde sabemos que los niños no solamente aprenden en la escuela, sino aprenden también en la comunidad, no solamente estos aprendizajes formales. Entonces, lo que hacemos con los niños son talleres, niños de 2 a 6 años y niños de 6 a 12 años de educación preescolar y primaria, estos talleres para fomentar esta conciencia ambiental. Ecologizando mi casa, en donde ellos dicen, bueno, ¿qué tengo que hacer en casa para poder no desperdiciar el agua? ¿Qué veo en mi comunidad? Los niños se quejan mucho en la comunidad en la que estamos, que es el Centro Comunitario Julián MacGregor, que es una zona de bajos recursos, de mucha violencia, de poca escolaridad. Los niños se quejan mucho que eso no sucede en países europeos, la parte de mucho excremento de perros, ¿no? Entonces los niños se quejan mucho de eso, de que van por la calle, hay lo que decía Isolda de las bicicletas. Aquí andar en bicicleta, un niño no puede andar en la calle. Entonces, a través de estos talleres, Basurarte, promovemos la conciencia ambiental, pero también promovemos esta parte de la recreatividad. Reutilizar, reciclar implica una creatividad por parte de los niños.
Muito pequeño vertellen, she spoke about education, and indeed in our programs, either at the kindergarten, basic level, and high school, we do have already in the programs education principles and goals. At the beginning, just attitudes, and later on proactive activities. Yeah. And then she was discussing this idea of promoting recycling, placing the example of Italy, that they do have a center for recycling principles to teach young people to do so, and reusing activities as well. Yep. The contest and the problem is when you come to different societies where they face how to expand this, not only expecting from the education, but also at home of surrounding education, up to what extent you are part of the environment and the environment is part of you. Yeah. When you discuss and you talk, and eventually how this can be applied at low-income or vulnerable societies. She's working in one very vulnerable society in neighborhoods of Mexico, where the children are facing very difficult situations around them. So that's very much the discussion.
There it's very challenging indeed. Yeah, but I think that education of the young children is very important, and also not only because they are the future generation, but also there's some, I have seen some research that children might influence their parents again. So they learn something about the environment at school, they become more environmentally conscious, and they're starting to discuss this at home. And there are some programs in the Netherlands that try to anticipate or to benefit from this. They come up with school programs where they try to involve the parents as well, and to see that the children can act as agents of change. So you start educating the child at school, but you hope that the behavior of the whole family will be influenced in that way. Yeah, and then it would be very important to see whether such programs would also work in deprived neighborhoods where people face many other challenges, and to see whether you can connect these environmental goals to the social goals as well. So that it's often called co-benefits, that you can accomplish multiple goals with the same type of interventions. Like I said, in the IPCC report, it was already mentioned or assessed that many environmental goals might benefit other sustainable development goals as well. And it would be good to see that on a lower local level as well, whether that can be accomplished.
Gracias. Margaret, please comment.
Do we have time?
Sure.
Okay. I'd like to come back to the example you gave about smoking, because I think that's very important. I think we sometimes have to look to see what processes have been successful. There are others too. I mean, in my lifetime, in Britain, for example, there's been a huge change in racism. And it's not to say that racism has disappeared entirely, but it has improved a lot. The situation's improved a lot, and it's now no longer really acceptable to be racist. Whereas when I was a child, it was perfectly acceptable to say the most dreadful things in the street. It was appalling. And I think one could follow some of these social changes. And this is something maybe we could pursue more in our research in UNAM using multidisciplinary teams, looking at some of these really quite seismic changes that have occurred socially. What was it? Were there particular things, or is it just a constant flow of ideas and commentaries? Because of course there's always to and fro. You always have your CNN versus your Fox News, arguing about these things. But things do change, and they do change for the better generally. And maybe we need more studies which look at in a kind of multidisciplinary way at some of these huge changes that have taken place. I wonder if are you doing that in Groningen?
I like this question very much. I fully agree, and we should do more historical studies as well, so in interdisciplinary settings, because I think we can learn a lot about from history. I'm not collaborating with historians myself, but I do know some people who do this, and it yielded very interesting insights. And I think this might also be one of the strategies you can follow to understand how values might change.
Yes, exactly.
So I've been discussing this with a professor of arts who was explaining to me how they try to change values in the middle, a long time, ages ago or so, in plays or via art. And it was very interesting, and so I would be keen on collaborating more with these type of persons, because I think we can learn a lot from it. So looking back in history, trying to explain why major changes did occur is really important as well. Yeah. So if you have historians...
Thank you. Isolda, Hilda, would you like to comment something about this interdisciplinarity?
Es importante también ver que, por ejemplo, en esta universidad, donde hay universitarios, donde hay estudiantes, el reciclado es muy pobre. La gente, muchos de mis estudiantes que comen aquí, que viven toda su vida, desde la mañana hasta la noche, utilizan, van a comprar y les entregan en platos de estos uniceles, cosas que no deben ya usarse en esta universidad. Tenemos desde que educarnos nosotros, a la Universidad Nacional, a nuestros estudiantes, de que de llevar un plato para poder recibir alimentos y evitar todo este tipo de plásticos, botellas, que puedan seguir deteriorando el ambiente. Es importante porque estamos hablando de sustentabilidad y de conservación en México y en la universidad. Y es en la universidad donde se llevan a cabo muchas cosas que conductas indeseables entre los estudiantes y profesores. Do you understand me?
No, don't worry.
I'm hesitant.
She brought an issue that I wanted to place on the table, that is, let's think about what universities can do, because universities are supposed to be a model for sustainability, and we think a model of sustainability because we change the lights, we change transportation, we change the electricity, we change the consumption. but how do we change the society of our community in order to be much more sustainable?
Yeah.
And we are talking about a very high-level educated people, very well-established people. I mean, we are the center of the potential training of the trainers. And therefore, what is the role of these universities in terms of psychology, in terms of movement of people into sustainability? So I just take the opportunities on that to bring this issue as well, and then everyone can comment on that. Okay.
And I did on it. It was like, maybe you said something more. No, I think we can play a role in different respects. So educate people so that they bring this knowledge into society and help to accomplish change. Also learning them to collaborate with other disciplines, so not only focus on their own limited view, but also understand different views so that you can collaborate, because sustainability problems require interdisciplinary approaches. No discipline on its own can solve them. But you were also mentioning the good example, right? There was a lot of plastics being used, etc. So, and that is important as well. So demonstrate that this can be accomplished, and that's, like I said with the Stockholm congestion trial, right? Let people experience what it is to have a sustainable lifestyle, and it's not that bad after all, or maybe it has many advantages as well. And I think we as universities can set the example. And at least what I now see in Groningen is that students are already also organizing to promote sustainable actions within the university.
Yes.
They're coming up with all kinds of initiatives to make change happen, and that's very promising as well. And
we have to be a model.
Yeah, we have to be, but it seems that the students are more and more taking up this responsibility themselves as well. They're very concerned about the environment, and they're really keen on addressing these problems, and they're less concerned about potential disadvantages than what I know from previous years when I was teaching my courses. I'm not sure whether the same is happening here.
Yep.
Yes, to some extent it is. I mean, there are many students who are engaged in trying to promote bicycle use, recycling in particular. That's a particular thing. Mm-hmm. But one of the things one has to think about it, I think, is whether you leave it to voluntarism or whether the university says, right, no more plastic bottles of water. We will not have plastic cups. We will have paper cups if necessary. At some point, I mean, a number of countries have done this seriously, and now you can't. I don't know if anybody's flown to Nairobi recently, but you're not allowed to take plastic bags. There are no plastic bags available within Kenya as a country, and if you arrive with a plastic bag with a bottle of whiskey from Schiphol, they will give you the whiskey, but they'll take the bag away. And there are videos. There's a lovely video which shows police entering into a market with their batons raised, ready to crash the people, you know. And they say, what is this? Is this drugs? Is this criminals? No, it's plastic bags.
Yeah, I think that you raise an important issue. Sometimes you just have to implement a policy and don't wait until everyone agrees about it. And there's plenty of examples that show that once you implement it, people are supportive anyway, maybe because they adapt to it, but also because they see the advantages. And especially with regard to plastics, I have seen other examples as well. There's also some towns in Argentina that you don't ever get a plastic bag anymore, especially in the natural areas. And that's a good thing. That's a very effective way to make change happen. You can't also only put the responsibility on individuals or households. Everyone has his or her role to play, and since context is very important, that is the factor that companies and governments can influence, so they should take their responsibility as well.
Let me please elaborate further on this. I certainly think that we need to go in the two ways, the bottom up and top down, so that there are some regulations, state regulations, especially meant to change attitudes, but as well as change all these different types of problems on the environment. And very often we see lots of initiatives from the students, young people, who are not willing to follow rules or certain things because they are open in their mind, creating new ways of thinking, new ways of acting. Their role is not finished outside of the room. They see the open spaces as part of their environment. That is not the case with scholars. You know, it is often that we just commit ourselves to a certain degree, our own responsibilities, and once you are out of that range, I'm evaluated by other means, okay? So I'm not going to take it of that. Collectively speaking, we are just a minority. I think that's important in this university, but how can you think, or how we can think of engaging a collective society into sustainability by means of understanding what are the trigger issues of the behavior? And that's an important issue because in this university we are very respectful of the differences. So we allowed everyone to think and act independently. Is it helpful? Is it wise? Or how do we do it in another wise in order to really make the difference, right? So what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I spoke with a professor of philosophy from Utrecht University. She is studying the dilemma between democracy and sustainability. And one of the things he claims or hypothesizes is democracy is an enemy of sustainability. That is so to put it really bold, because he said some of the major changes that happened, like abandoning slavery, had very negative implications for some population groups. So if we would have prioritized democracy all the times in those problems would not have been solved. Yeah, I'm not, this is a very bold statement, but yeah, sometimes that's also the role of government, right? To protect the common interest, and you can't please everyone, but you can still involve people in the decision making, listen to their concerns, trying to address their concerns so that it has less disadvantageous consequences for them.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, I don't know if people in Morelia are still connected, and I'm going to, yes? I'm going to leave the floor to them, so if there is someone from Morelia who would like to place a comment on that, I'm addressing first to them so they are away, so that they have the opportunity to participate as well. Podríamos conectarnos con el grupo de Morelia por si alguien del grupo de Morelia quiere poner una pregunta o un punto de discusión. Les agradecemos si ponen el micrófono y preguntamos si alguien de Morelia nos quiere participar. ¿Nos escuchan en Morelia? Hola, hola.
Creo que no.
Even wachten.
Muchas gracias y por ahorita no hay ninguna pregunta o comentario.
Ok, bueno, muchas gracias. Entonces vamos ahora a pedirle al público si alguien quiere poner alguna pregunta o un punto que crean en donde la opinión de todos puede ser importante. Por favor, adelante.
Sí, se habla de crear conciencia a los niños. Se habla de los problemas a nivel universitario, de las actitudes que tenemos nosotros los profesores, ciertos comportamientos. Yo quisiera preguntarle a la doctora, ha sido toda una evolución el combate en contra de la contaminación ambiental. Primero fue un combate, luego una racionalización ambiental, no ha dado resultado. Después el desarrollo sustentable y tampoco ha dado resultado. Ahorita se está manejando el desarrollo sostenible de acuerdo a la Agenda 2015-2030. Como se dijo al inicio, tenemos 11 años muy cortos para cumplir esas metas, esos objetivos. Ahora, desde el punto de vista, ¿quiénes son los que tenemos que llevar a buen fin, a buen término esas metas? Pues todos, pero ¿quiénes vamos a liderar esos objetivos? Pues todos, pero supuestamente yo veo que no hay conciencia entre nosotros los investigadores. ¿Cómo ha habido la evolución también desde el punto de vista de investigación? Primero por disciplina, interdisciplina, y no ha dado resultado, multidisciplina y tampoco. Ahorita se está manejando la multidisciplinariedad, se maneja, pero según yo, según lo que he visto, no se lleva a cabo. Yo creo que es el punto de partida de nosotros hacia la comunidad, trabajar transdisciplinariamente. ¿Qué quiere decir transdisciplinariamente? Bueno, yo lo veo así, que voy a trascender, yo soy ingeniero bioquímico, voy a trascender con un psicólogo, voy a trascender con un economista, con todos los campos, pero no lo vemos así. O sea, yo lo veo desde mi punto de vista personal, o si no desde mi punto de vista de carrera. La doctora manejó la motivación intrínseca. No sé qué tantos estudios se estén llevando a cabo para que nosotros, los investigadores, verdaderamente sintamos esa trascendencia para trabajar multidisciplinariamente. Creo que ese es el punto de partida también. O sea, el extremo, ¿no?, de niños con los investigadores. No sé qué tanto se esté llevando a cabo esos trabajos desde el punto de vista psicología, motivación, que no solo una disciplina, no solamente ciertas multidisciplinas van a resolver el problema, sino manejar la transdisciplinariedad. Esa es mi pregunta.
Yeah.
He was talking about the evolution of different nations, first bound and to rationalize and eventually to change languages, but it seems important to think that none of them has really worked.
Yeah.
And therefore he is asking if all of us we need to jump into transdisciplinarity.
Yeah.
It's a new way of really changing our attitude, not only working within our discipline, but also wanting to know stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the question. First, I think that many attempts have been done to change attitude, to change behavior, but I also think that many of those attempts were not the most strong attempts. So better attempts could have been made, and maybe then they would have been more successful. That's first. But I fully agree with your point that more transdisciplinary research is needed. So not only collaborating with different disciplines, which is already challenging, but also with people or practitioners, different types of practitioners, can be governments, can be businesses, which is another challenge again, but we do both, and I find both in the end quite rewarding as well. It takes time to understand the different languages, but also by collaborating with practitioners, they come up with issues, with questions that trigger me to look at things in a different way or to conduct my research in a different way. So they challenged my thinking and the theories that we have. So in the end we come up with better ideas. So I think this is really an important issue, and luckily this is more and more being done and also appreciated. For example, in the Netherlands, many funding schemes from the National Science Foundations imply that you work with other disciplines, but also with practitioners, and oftentimes you need even financing from those practitioners, demonstrating that they have a key interest in your research as well. So, and I think, like I said, you need different approaches to deal with these complex problems in the first place, but to make sure that they are also realistic and fit with how practitioners think about this. Collaborating with them is also very important. Do you want to add?
No, I'm not.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Hay alguien quien quieras?
No, aquí, yo no había quien da la palabra.
Pues si quieres nos vamos así para...
Gracias. Quería preguntar cómo podemos elaborar un verdadero programa de educación ambiental, por ejemplo, con las particularidades de la Ciudad de México, que no hay mucha biodiversidad, que no hay áreas naturales que los niños puedan visitar cerca, que no hay muchas acciones, que los niños lleven lo que está planteando en el aula a acciones verdaderas de conservación. ¿Cómo hacemos un programa real de educación ambiental que trascienda en el espíritu de los niños para que ellos tomen actitudes y hábitos y que su conocimiento lo lleven a otros espacios, no solamente a la esfera del aula, sino que lo que estén aprendiendo realmente trascienden ellos para que lo lleven en sus familias, en sus casas. ¿Cómo elaboramos un verdadero programa de educación ambiental con las particularidades de la Ciudad de México?
Dado que hay varias personas interesadas en participar, pues podría recoger, no sé, 3, 4 preguntas y les pediría ser lo más breve y conciso posible. Está
My question is about how much research has been made about pro-environmental behavior and values in rural areas. I mean, most of what you talk about was in a very urban environment, and I think that there may be different processes in changing behavior at the level of food production, for example. So that would be my question.
¿Otra persona más? ¿Quién?
My question is, what do you think about the interdependence paradigm which says that one person could be environmental interest, but at the same time egoistic and selfish? I mean, what to do that two interests have a common goal, a common goal, and to do environmental behavior with the two interests.
¿Podemos parar aquí por ahora?
Bueno, con respecto a los programas, esa es la pregunta del millón. Si supiéramos cómo, pues podríamos hacerlo en la escuela. Yo quisiera comentar 2 cosas. Una, desgraciadamente, en nuestro país, las personas que están a cargo de la educación son personas que son más políticas que encargadas de educación. Entonces, hacer los programas desde fuera hacia la escuela es difícil, ¿no? Sin embargo, no solamente en la escuela se aprende, ¿no? Entonces, creo que hay muchos aprendizajes que los niños tienen y que llegan con ellos a la escuela. En el caso de la sustentabilidad es esto: el primer ambiente para el niño es la casa, después es su escuela, después es su comunidad, después es la parte de su país. Eso es lo que tienen cercano a ellos. Entonces, ¿cómo hacer un buen programa partiendo de la escuela? Los niños mucho es del ejemplo, mucho es de lo que hacemos en casa, ahorrar el agua, utilizar la basura, poder darle otra utilización a todos estos desechos que estamos haciendo. No tiene, cuando hablamos de una conciencia ambiental, no se tiene que ver de algo grande hacia el niño. Creo que son estos pequeños granitos que forman una gran bola de nieve que se puede llevar a cabo. Es muy interesante investigaciones que ha hecho el doctor Urbina cuando se les pregunta a las personas, a la gente común, ¿cuál es tu responsabilidad con respecto al ambiente? Ellos dicen, sí tengo algo de responsabilidad, pero mi responsabilidad es menor a la que la tiene toda la población, todo el mundo. Entonces, yo tengo responsabilidad, mi familia tiene un poquito más de responsabilidad, mi comunidad tiene más, el país tiene más, pero la población de todo el mundo tiene toda la responsabilidad, ¿no? Entonces, veamos estas distancias en cuanto a esta percepción de qué tan responsables somos. Si empezamos con uno mismo, en decir soy responsable y soy responsable en esto y por lo tanto tengo que modificar estas situaciones, pues entonces vamos avanzando. Un programa de educación ambiental se inicia desde uno mismo, desde la casa, desde la comunidad, desde estos ambientes, como lo dicen los niños, esto que tenemos cercano a nosotros mismos, lo que pasa en la universidad, ¿no? Lo que decía Isolda, o sea, el utilizar estos desechos, bueno, estos plásticos, bueno, traigo mi plato tienen que notar, claro, evitar estas situaciones.
¿Quién quiere comentar sobre any other comment on the other three questions? Perhaps an important question is this difference between urban perception and rural perception, especially because ruralities are different. The rurality in the Netherlands is completely different than the rurality in Latin America.
Yeah, no, that's a nice question. I never looked into it that in detail because our samples include people from cities and rural areas, but you can say that, you might say the Netherlands is one big city and it's nothing to do with what a rural area here is. So I think it's an interesting question and I wouldn't know the answer. I don't know of any research that particularly looked into it. So if you want to do it, I would be curious to learn the results.
I think it's a very interesting question because I can see where your question comes from. In Mexico, we have a huge faith in our communities, I think. In this country, because of the land reform after the revolution, there are communities which manage their own land. And there's a very strong support for these kinds of communities within the academic and biological community. I do think that we have to look a little bit more critically at some of our views about this, to be honest. I think sometimes we have rather a rosy view of what community values are. I mean, we talk a lot about how communities are much closer to nature and how because of their roots they are more likely to have more conservationist ideas and so on. And possibly it's also said that they have more egalitarian ideas because they are communities. But I think if you look at communities today, you will I'm not going to speak about their values about nature because I don't know so much of it. But if you look at their views about equality, they're not so rosy. There's a lot of discrimination. There's a lot of landlessness within communities. And I do think that the Yunnan community has to be a bit more critical about some of these issues, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and then your question about what if the values conflict, right? That is
the selfish.
That is the basic issue, of course, and that's what I should have explained that a little bit more when I discussed the contextual factors. Because what happens if pro-environmental actions are really not convenient, very expensive, then there's a value conflict, right? Doing something good for the environment would not be very good for you. Your egoistic values would be threatened, or your hedonic values will be threatened, and then depending on the conflict between those, if it's really expensive or uncomfortable to act upon your biospheric values, people will act upon their egoistic values. So it's not that if sometimes people ask me what percentage of the people can be qualified as biospheric people. That's not how it works, right? You can have scores on each of those values, and depending on how you prioritize them, you make different choices. But someone with strong biospheric values still also endorses egoistic values. And if acting upon your biospheric values is not very good for your egoistic values, you will probably not do so. So it's about the relative conflict and how much you prioritize one value over the other. Does it address your question?
Bueno, es que aparentemente una persona puede ser una o ser otra. Pero ¿qué pasa si la misma persona tiene diferentes circunstancias?
Yeah, no, that happens all the time because we endorse all these values. So then it depends on how important the biospheric values are to you compared to the egoistic values, to what extent you're willing to endorse some additional costs. So the more important biospheric values are relative to the egoistic ones, you might be willing to incur some more costs, but at some point no one wants to do it anymore. Yeah.
Ok, gracias. Otras preguntas, por favor, si nos ayudas, Linda.
Another question in relation to rural areas. Biodiversity of Mexico is in rural areas. So for me it's very important to know if there are some studies in Mexico in this way, because I think that it's very important the studies in cities. I really enjoyed the talk, but I think it's important for me, probably for many people, to know what's going on in these studies. And the other that I would like to know is, for example, I have been thinking on social sciences to work with ecologists. I am an ecologist. And well, the thing is, for example, the idea of behavior. Human behavior is clear that is very important, but also I am thinking in cultural aspects in rural areas. I mean, we have many Indians in Mexico. And I think, for example, sociologists and anthropologists, all those people are very important. So I would like to ask you your opinion about what would be the way, or in which way all these social disciplines are complementary. For example, you are a psychologist. I was not thinking in psychologists before this talk, but it's very important, I agree. But I think also, for example, anthropologists and sociologists, for example, whatever you think is important.
Another question?
Hi, I'm actually working on a kind of a project where I'm trying to ensure sustainable food security nutritional and food security for a community in Mexico using agroecological approaches. So it's kind of like I'm trying to design an intervention, but based on evidence that not only comes from the actors of the problem, but rather from like scientific evidence. So I'm doing a little experiment, and then based on the results, I present to the community, and then they will decide if they want to adopt the solution that I'm proposing. So I'm trying to use indicators in the profit, people, and planet, how can I say, dimensions of sustainability. My main issue here is, or my main question is, you as expert, I would like to know if you can suggest more indicators in the people and the human dimension. Because so far, because I'm so focused on food security, I have nutrition, and I have, for instance, equality, and I have another one, sorry, it's workload in the household. So I don't know if you can suggest another indicator that I can use for my study. Thank you.
Let me just tell, déjame comentarles, mañana a las 10 en la sala Benito Juárez de este Universum.
Micrófono, por favor.
Yeah, sorry.
Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, mañana a las 10 en la sala Benito Juárez de este Universum, vamos a tener una reunión con alumnos de posgrado para discutir justo esas preguntas de corte metodológico, de corte puntual, sobre cómo hacer, cómo medir, cómo incorporar en su investigación temas de investigación transdisciplinaria, etcétera, desde el punto de vista del INDA, para que, si quieren las preguntas de corte más sobre investigación a nivel estudiantil, la podemos resolver mañana.
Yeah, the problem is I don't know if I fit in the next discussion, so I don't know if
Okay, don't worry.
Just one.
It's okay, fine, but I'm just letting you know, so that if you guys would like to join us as well tomorrow, that will be all welcome as well, okay? Hay otra pregunta más, ¿no? Please.
Sí, era una reflexión complementaria a lo que decía el doctor y la doctora, ¿no? O sea, si vemos el caso de México, es una enorme contradicción. O sea, uno ve el patrón de diversidad biológica, cómo se va volviendo más rico y más complejo hacia el sur y sureste de México. Y si vemos, hay cierta correlación también con la culturalidad, ¿no? O sea, las regiones bioculturales son más reducidas y más abundantes también en ese mismo patrón. Ajá. Eso implica una gran diversidad de formas de interactuar con el medio, con los recursos. Se supone que ahí está un gran reservorio de recursos para, no para México, para el mundo. Y sin embargo, si hacemos un mapa de indicadores de marginación, también sigue el mismo patrón. O sea, es bastante llamativo esa correlación, es muy extraña, pues, ¿no? O sea, y se dan las contradicciones de que podemos tener, hasta hace algunos años, por ejemplo, en Chiapas, las grandes presas, se exportaba energía eléctrica, y a un lado de las presas, comunidades que no tienen energía eléctrica, ¿no? Y ese divorcio que hay entre la forma de pensar en el medio urbano con la rural, ¿no? Nunca, hasta hace poco por lo menos, no nos poníamos a pensar que quizás por cada metro cúbico de agua, el costo de cada metro cúbico de agua en la Ciudad de México, se tendría que pagar un porcentaje etiquetado para que las comunidades más aguas de la cuenca de la Macusac, en lugar de talar el bosque, lo conservaran. O sea, si no hay nada a cambio por servicio ambiental, también no hay un entendimiento entre las partes, ¿no? Es una reflexión simplemente.
Yeah.
It is an invitation to work in Mexico. He just described the first question emphasis in which the correlation between culture and nature is very strong in Mexico. The richest biological areas in Mexico also correlate with the cultural areas as well, southeastern part and south part, where we've got a lot of indigenous roots. And therefore rurality in Mexico, so to be environmentally rich does not mean to be sustainably rich. Inequity, as Margaret mentioned, and other racism and gender problems and all kinds of things are also related to that. Marginalizations, he was also explaining that the correlation exists. So where we've got our most potential in terms of environmental growth, we also have the largest challenges, especially when you take into account that many of the policies are meant to suffice and to cover urban needs on the shoulders of the rural communities in Mexico. So he's very much emphasizing on this issue as well as the first question.
Yeah. Yeah. Very important issues indeed, and very important to understand it better, because there's, what I said, most studies have been done in very selected regions, and it's very important to look into different regions and to address the specific challenges there. You were also mentioning what's the complementarity between different social sciences. Yeah, they are complementary. They also have a lot of overlap or some common grounds, so that you can easily find ways to collaborate. I'm always looking at common grounds. I know some other people are looking at the differences and emphasizing those, but they have different emphases as well. And that's also important that they learn to collaborate and understand each other's languages, because they have something unique to put on the table. So that's also something that we work on. We have established a network. It's called Person. If you want to see it, person.eu. You're invited to join that network. That's a network of social sciences, researchers and humanities on energy, to make sure that our knowledge is becoming better available to practitioners. Mm-hmm. And also to help define a research agenda, and it can be a common research agenda as well, an interdisciplinary research agenda on social sciences and humanities, for example.
And then the last comment on the lady on the food security.
Oh yeah, if you write me an email, I'll send you some papers on studies that were aimed at understanding the impact of policy on the social, on quality of life, it was called. That's more the social dimension you were referring to, and that included all kinds of quality of life indicators, and some of those were mentioned by you, and there are more. Not every indicator will be relevant for you, but then you can select some that you deem important. Yeah?
Si hubiera una última pregunta muy cortita, por favor, porque tenemos que salir en 3 minutos, porque tenemos que inaugurar la oficina de la Universidad de Groningen. Entonces, si son tan amables, una pregunta rápida, ¿sí?
Es un comentario, a ver si pueden darnos su opinión. Me parece fundamental este contraste entre lo que ocurre en ambientes urbanos y rurales. Y esto me parece que es fundamental, incluso en lo que mencionaba en la plática, de que es importante conocer para poder actuar, porque todo esto a final de cuentas se vincula con que en la medida en la que conozcamos estos contrastes podemos traducirlo en políticas públicas, que me parece fundamental siempre tener en cuenta eso, incluso en los grupos transdisciplinarios, porque es importante tener a todas las disciplinas, pero también ahí a los tomadores de decisiones. Si no, no podemos dar el paso, ¿no? ¿Qué sigue? Eso incluso impactaría en cuestiones de educación ambiental, en programas de educación ambiental, que me parece que sí es fundamental iniciar desde el individuo, pero no se puede hacer a un lado del Estado. El Estado tiene que estar ahí, definitivamente.
Policy making issues, to what extent we need to engage and bring into this issue the policymakers as well.
Yeah, policymakers as well, but the policymakers could also listen more to the public, and because we know that all kinds of policies are more acceptable when people have the feeling that they had a say, and it doesn't mean that the policymakers should exactly do what they demanded, but that at least that they have the idea that their views have been considered, that their concerns are being considered, that attempts are being made to address those concerns. So it's called procedural fairness. So make sure that people are taken seriously when developing policies. But policymakers and political sciences, for that matter, should be definitely included in this debate as well.
Tenemos que concluir porque nos ganan los compromisos. Les pediría que las preguntas que faltan, si quieren, me las pueden hacer llegar al correo que tenemos en la coordinación y se las podemos enviar a la doctora para que les dé atención a posteriori, si les parece bien. I just need to thank to the people here in the presidium as well for the opportunity, and let you know that on the 28th of March we're going to have our second seminar, which is going to take place at the Unidad de Posgrado. At the same time, at 10 hours, Dr. Ezequiel Escura will be touching the relevance of ecology and sustainability, and therefore we are going to be discussing other issues as well related to, for instance, rurality in Mexico, and at least he knows a little bit more about that because he's been working in Mexico for many years. And I just want to thank, to take the floor to thank you, Linda, for the effort of coming here. Professor Sterken, thank you very much for this opportunity to launch this seminar, and all the group from the University of Groningen, Joyce, thank you for all the effort as well. And I'm going to ask my colleague Alejandra to give the recognitions for the participants.
Hi, thank you very much for this interesting round table, and we would like to give you the UD certified from Coordinación Universitaria para la Sustentabilidad for your nice participation and time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.